Time is the one thing a CEO can never negotiate for. Laura Shaw spent her entire life building a legacy, only to discover that her only daughter saw her as nothing more than a winning lottery ticket. A chilling secret is about to spill out, right into a glass of celebratory wine. Hi everyone, I am Casey. Have you ever wondered if having all the money in the world would let us turn back the clock and mend the cracks in our hearts? Today's story about Laura Shaw is a heavy, bitter sigh about time and betrayal. It is about a mother standing at the very peak of her career, only to find herself falling into the deep abyss of her own family. Let us listen together to her own words, coming straight from her heart. The hum of the printer in my home office finally stopped, spitting out the final contract. $60 million. The numbers stared back at me from the crisp paper, but they felt strangely cold, devoid of any real weight. I leaned back into my familiar leather chair, the one Peter bought me years ago, and looked out at our North Carolina garden as it began to drown in an amber sunset. For 40 years, I had been running a race against the clock to build this empire, brick by brick, deal by deal. But today, as I finally crossed the finish line, I realized I was standing at the starting line of a terrifying, hollow loneliness. Peter is gone now, and this house has grown so vast that even my softest sigh seems to echo off the walls. I caught my reflection in the old bronze mirror in the hallway on my way out. The woman looking back had the sharp, calculating eyes of a CEO who never lost a negotiation, but the lines around her mouth told a different story. They spoke of 15 years of missed family dinners and birthdays spent in boardrooms. I had bought Emily everything a child could ever want, from those simple Target outfits when she was little to the most expensive 529 college savings plans money could buy. I gave her the world, but I realize now that I forgot to buy myself a place in her heart. Every night, my dining table is set for one. Just one plate, one glass of wine, and the suffocating silence of the grandfather clock in the corner. Every tick sounds like a judgment. "Laura," it says, "you are running out of time." It was that gnawing fear that finally made me pick up the phone. I thought I could use this money to make amends, to finally bridge the distance between us. When Emily and Ryan agreed to meet me for dinner at the finest steakhouse downtown, I felt a rush of joy I had not felt in years, like a child on Christmas morning. I picked out my best outfit from Talbot's and put on a hint of the perfume Peter used to love. I walked into that restaurant, hoping a generous check could somehow erase 15 years of coldness. I had no idea that my desperate hunger for connection had just turned me into the perfect prey. We sat at a table bathed in soft candlelight, the air rich with the scent of prime rib. I was laughing, a sound I thought was happiness. But then, I stepped away for a moment to take a quick business call. As I turned back toward the table, a young waiter named Evan caught my sleeve, his hand trembling slightly. "Mrs. Shaw," he whispered, his eyes darting nervously toward where my daughter sat. "Please, do not drink that wine. I saw that girl put some kind of powder in your glass." In that heartbeat, time simply stopped. I looked through the glass partition and saw Emily smiling so sweetly at Ryan. But her eyes were dead. She was not looking at her mother. She was looking at a legacy that was finally about to be liquidated. I sat motionless in the shadows of my old Mercedes after leaving the restaurant, my ears still ringing with Evan's urgent whisper. The streetlights flickered across the old photographs tucked into the glove compartment, illuminating broken shards of an era when I foolishly believed I had everything under control. For the past 15 years, I have been so consumed by financial reports and the market's collapse during the 2008 Great Recession that I failed to notice I was losing the only thing that actually mattered right inside my own home. 15 years. That is not just a number on a spreadsheet. It is a cavernous dark pit of absence and social disconnect. I remember the day Emily graduated from college. I was not there because of an emergency board meeting to save our company's stock price. I remember at least 3 times she called me, her voice trembling and needing a mother's advice after her father passed away. But I hung up because I was in the middle of a meeting with a new partner. My misguided priorities, placing the corporation above my own blood, are exactly what pushed Emily into the arms of a man like Ryan. He is flashy and empty, yet I chose to build a $60 million empire instead of building trust with my daughter. Now, I am paying for that choice with my very safety. Peter, my husband, used to just laugh it off and tell me to be less hard on Ryan. He loved Emily with a blind devotion, while I saw the hunger in my son-in-law's eyes from the very first day. But I stayed silent. I kept my mouth shut because I did not want to shatter the fragile illusion of happiness I craved after Peter died. I reached over and opened the small box in the car's console, finding the pearl necklace I bought for Emily's 30th birthday. I never had the courage to give it to her. An unsaid apology and a gift covered in dust. All of it serves as evidence of my own cowardice. Now that the naked truth of that white powder has come to light, I do not just feel fury toward Emily. I feel a deep, burning shame for myself. Is there even a chance left for me to fix 15 years of mistakes? Or has time truly run out, leaving our family legacy to be incinerated by the very child we loved so much? I looked down at my phone and saw a text from Ryan asking if I had finally rested yet. No, Ryan, I am not resting. I have finally woken up. I stood in the narrow hallway leading back to the dining room, feeling the biting chill from the air conditioning blowing down my neck. Evan's warning was still fresh, a sharp heat that contrasted with the coldness settling in my soul. 15 years of regret were enough. I had spent more than half my life building an empire, and I refused to let it crumble because of a single moment of emotional weakness. I took a deep breath. The scent of grilled steak and red wine from the dining room no longer felt inviting. It smelled thick with the stench of betrayal. My legs were shaking, and every step felt as heavy as lead. The fear of rejection, the terror that if I exposed this truth I would lose Emily forever, almost made me turn and run. I thought about just leaving the restaurant, calling an Uber back to my empty house, and continuing to live in silent regret. But then, I saw Ryan's silhouette through the gap in the door. He was adjusting his tie with a look of triumph, and Emily, the child I once cradled, was staring at my wine glass like she was waiting for a final curtain call. Number 1. I am not some confused old woman for them to manipulate and discard. The heartache of betrayal slowly gave way to the cold clarity of a CEO who had survived dozens of hostile takeovers. I was more than just a mother. I was Laura Shaw, a woman who built her life from nothing. If this was a battle for control over my life, I would be the one to rewrite the script. I slipped off Peter's wedding ring and squeezed it in my palm, searching for one last bit of strength. No matter what happens, I told myself, I have to try to save myself and perhaps my daughter's soul as well. I walked into the room with the most convincing tired smile I had ever performed. Ryan stood up quickly, his hand touching my shoulder, a touch that made my skin crawl. He asked if I was okay in a voice as sweet as poisoned honey. I nodded, purposefully acting a bit unsteady. As I reached for a bottle of San Pellegrino mineral water, I deliberately caught my sleeve on my glass, knocking the water all over Emily's expensive jacket. Chaos broke out exactly as I had planned. While Emily jumped up in a panic, and Ryan rushed to clean her with napkins, my hands, the same hands that had signed million-dollar contracts without a tremor, performed a lightning-fast swap. My glass of Pinot Noir, the one containing that white powder, was now sitting directly in front of Emily. I sat down, my heart thudding against my ribs, and watched as my daughter picked up the glass to calm her nerves. For 15 years, I was wrong to stay silent, but tonight, I chose to act. If you were Laura, would you have chosen to leave quietly to preserve the image of your daughter, or would you have acted as decisively as she did? Betrayal from family is always the deepest wound. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts and let Casey know if you have ever faced a difficult choice like this within your own family. The scene that followed played out like a terrifying, slow-motion film. Emily had just set her wine glass back down when her eyes began to glaze over, losing their focus and turning dull. She tried to utter my name, but the only sound that came out was a series of thick, choked moans. Then the convulsions hit her. Ryan lunged toward her, but as I watched him, I saw a flicker of raw panic in his eyes that had nothing to do with worry for his wife. It was the look of a man whose carefully crafted script had suddenly gone off the rails. As the ambulance sirens began to tear through the Charlotte, North Carolina night, I sat in the back of my car, watching the rhythmic flash of the red lights. I could feel the invisible line I had just crossed, a boundary from which there would be no returning back to the woman I used to be. At the hospital, Ryan played the role of the devastated husband with sickening perfection in front of the doctors. He paced the waiting room, rambling about how Emily had a history of severe seafood allergies. I stood by the vending machine, cold and silent, observing his every move like a predator watching its prey stumble. When Dr. Chen finally stepped out of the resuscitation room with a grim expression, I knew the facade was about to crumble. "This is not an allergic reaction," the doctor said, looking directly at Ryan with a piercing gaze. "We found a massive amount of olanzapine in her bloodstream, which is a powerful antipsychotic medication that can cause temporary memory loss or even a deep coma if taken in such a high dose." I saw Ryan stiffen, a fine bead of sweat breaking out on his forehead. He had no idea that the very drug meant to erase my mind was currently ravaging his wife's instead. I waited for the right moment when Ryan stepped outside to smoke a cigarette, and then I followed him like a shadow. Tucked into a quiet corner of the hallway near the emergency exit, I heard his voice drop into a low, venomous growl. He was on the phone with someone named Reed. "The plan is a mess." The old lady swapped the glasses. "And now Emily is in a coma," he hissed into the receiver. "You need to prepare the guardianship papers immediately. We are opening an emergency court hearing tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. We have to declare her mentally incompetent before she has a chance to move that $60 million. My heart tightened in my chest, not just at the mention of the money, but at the realization that they wanted to strip away my freedom and my dignity, locking me away like a confused animal in a cage. I knew I had very little time left. While Ryan was busy spinning his web of lies at the hospital, I drove straight to their suburban home, the very house I had helped them pay for years ago. Using the backup security code Emily had given me back when Peter was still alive, I stepped into the house. It smelled of expensive scented candles, yet it felt utterly frozen and lifeless. I sat down at Ryan's MacBook, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. In a hidden folder deep within his mail history, I found a document titled The Shaw Contingency. As I scrolled through the pages, the blood in my veins seemed to turn to ice. Ryan did not just want my money. He had been secretly using my company's logistics and shipping routes to move illicit goods for the past 2 years. My decision to sell the company for $60 million had accidentally triggered a comprehensive federal audit scheduled for next month. He needed legal guardianship over me to block that audit, or at the very least, to secure enough cash to disappear before the FBI came knocking on the door. I closed the laptop and took a long, steady breath. The regret of the last 15 years had finally been forged into a white-hot flame of resolve. I could not fix the past, but I could certainly protect my future and ensure that Peter's legacy was not dragged into the dirt. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Wright, the veteran attorney who had stood by my side through 3 decades of corporate battles. "Wright, it is Laura," I said, my voice no longer that of a lonely widow, but the voice of the CEO who once made competitors tremble. "I need you to activate our highest level of legal protection. We have a hearing at 8 tomorrow morning, and I have a very specific list of federal crimes and smuggling evidence that we need to report immediately." The hunt had officially begun. I drove back to Charlotte Memorial Hospital under a cold, persistent drizzle that seemed to blanket all of North Carolina in a gray shroud. In my purse, the hard drive containing the digital trail of Ryan's crimes felt incredibly heavy, like a ticking time bomb just waiting for the right moment to go off. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, that hollow hour when the world feels thin and fragile. The hospital hallways were eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the rhythmic thud of my heels on the polished linoleum and the distant, low hum of a vending machine tucked into an alcove. I stood outside the recovery room for a long moment, looking through the small glass pane. Emily lay there, her face as pale as the sheets, looking so small and motionless under the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights. And then there was Ryan. He was slumped in a cheap leather armchair in the corner, his head in his hands, perfectly playing the part of the grieving, exhausted husband. But I knew better now. I knew that beneath that weary exterior sat a predator waiting for his chance to strike. The second I pushed the door open, Ryan practically leaped to his feet. His face was etched with fatigue, and for once, I think that part was actually real, mostly because his perfect little plan had just hit a massive breathing obstacle named Laura Shaw. He rushed toward me, his arms reaching out as if to pull me into a comforting embrace, but I stepped back with a practiced, elegant grace, pretending I just needed to set my heavy bag down on the table. "Oh, Mom, where on earth have you been?" he cried out, his voice thick with a fake concern that I once would have mistaken for genuine love. "I have been worried sick about you. The doctors say Emily is going to be stable, but they are very concerned about you. You have seemed so confused and out of sorts since dinner." I watched him closely, seeing the first bricks of the wall he was trying to build around me, a wall labeled dementia and memory loss. I sat down in a straight-back chair, looking him dead in the eye, my gaze steady and unblinking. "I am perfectly fine, Ryan," I said, my voice calm and level. "I just needed some fresh air to clear my head." Ryan let out a long, theatrical sigh of sympathy, the kind of condescending sound people usually reserve for the elderly or the broken. "Mom, don't you remember?" he whispered, leaning in closer. "At the restaurant, you were struggling. You knocked over your water twice. You started saying these very strange, paranoid things about the waiter, that poor boy Evan. Dr. Chen even pulled me aside to ask if you were on any medication for Alzheimer's. He moved even closer then, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial murmur. Even Emily noticed it before she collapsed. She was so upset because you kept forgetting things we had literally just finished talking about. Maybe, once this is all over, we should look into a professional retreat for you. I found a wonderful place up near Asheville, a beautiful facility where they specialize in cognitive support for seniors. My blood began to boil at the sheer audacity of it, but I kept my face an absolute mask of professional indifference. I thought back to the most high-stakes board meetings I had ever navigated. Those rooms where men much smarter and more dangerous than Ryan had tried to dismantle me by attacking my sharpest assets. Ryan was a clumsy amateur in comparison. Asheville, I repeated slowly, taking a small, deliberate sip of ice-cold water. That is a beautiful part of the state. But I have no intention of going anywhere, Ryan. And as for my memory, it is sharper than it has been in years. I remember everything about tonight. I remember the exact vintage of the wine we ordered. I remember every detail of Evan the waiter's face. And I remember exactly what that little vial of white powder looked like in Emily's hand right before the swap. I saw his pupils contract in a split second of pure, unadulterated shock. The practiced smile on his face didn't just fade, it froze solid. "Mom, I think the stress is just making you see things that aren't there," he stammered, trying desperately to regain his footing and his control over the narrative. Emily was just reaching for her heart medication. "Don't do this, Ryan." I cut him off, my words coming out as cold and hard as stainless steel. "I have already spent the last few hours on the phone with my attorney, Mr. Wright. Emily's medical records and those blood test results are going to be kept under strict seal. And I am the only one who will have access to them. I am the one paying the bills here with the highest level of private insurance. And I am the one who decides who is allowed in this room and who isn't." I stood up then, closing the distance between us until I was the one looming over him. "I know all about the 8 o'clock hearing tomorrow morning. Did you really think you could just shuffle me off to a nursing home and walk away with $60 million? Did you honestly believe I wouldn't find out about your little contingency plans?" Ryan took a physical step back, the confidence draining out of him so fast it was almost pathetic to watch. For the first time, he was seeing the Laura Shaw he had never bothered to look for, not the lonely, grieving widow he thought he could bully, but the woman who had led thousands of employees through the worst economic storms of the last 40 years. "Now," I said, my voice carrying a weight that brooked no argument, "you are going to leave this hospital. Go home and try to prepare for that court date if you like. But I am staying here with my daughter. And Ryan, let me give you a piece of advice. Never, ever underestimate the memory of a woman who spent 4 decades memorizing every single digit on a financial statement." As he turned and slinked out of the room like a scolded dog, I felt a new kind of strength radiating through me. I was still in pain, and the wound from Emily's betrayal was still raw and bleeding in my heart. But the fear was gone. I had finally refused to be the victim. I was back in the driver's seat. As soon as Ryan slinked out of the hospital room with the look of a man scrambling to find a new way to lie, I reached for my phone. The clock on the wall of the intensive care unit marked exactly 4:15 in the morning. At this hour, time is the only currency that matters. And I knew I had to move faster than the shadow my son-in-law was trying to cast over me. I looked down at Emily, her skin still appearing translucent under the harsh medical lights, and a sharp pang of grief twisted in my chest. I had spent 15 years drowning in regret for the time I lost with her, But I realized in that quiet room that I could not afford another minute of sorrow. My $60 million legacy and, more importantly, my very freedom were at stake. I would not allow Peter's life work to be dragged through the mud by a man who saw his family as nothing more than a series of assets to be liquidated. My emotions, which had been raw and bleeding just hours ago, began to freeze into a clear, cold logic. I opened my Bank of America app, the glow of the screen reflecting in the darkened window. My fingers moved with the practiced precision of a woman who had spent decades managing high-stakes accounts. I changed every password for my personal accounts and my corporate credit lines. Then, I dialed the priority support number for private banking clients. When the representative answered, my voice was steady, leaving no room for hesitation or secondary questions. I am Laura Shaw, and I need to freeze all secondary access and power of attorney privileges on my accounts immediately, I told them. Ryan had spent years quietly weaving himself into the small corners of our family finances. But tonight, I was cutting every single thread. As the representative confirmed the lockdown, I felt my breath become lighter for the first time in years. I was no longer just a mother being hunted. I was the rightful owner of my life and my fortune once again. By 5 o'clock in the morning, I was pulling into the parking garage of the Bank of America Corporate Center in Uptown Charlotte. The city was just beginning to stir, a few streetlights still flickering against the early morning mist. I walked into Mr. Wright's office, and he was already there, holding a steaming cup of Starbucks and looking every bit like the legal shark he had been for 30 years. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. They have already filed an emergency petition for guardianship at the Charlotte Probate Court, Wright said, spreading a thick stack of documents across the polished mahogany table. Their claim is that you are suffering from acute memory loss following the trauma, and that you are currently missing. I handed him the hard drive containing the Shaw contingency file I had taken from Ryan's computer and a copy of Emily's medical records. We are not just fighting the guardianship, I said, my voice dropping an octave. We are going to ensure Ryan never has the chance to do this to anyone else. We worked through the next hour, drafting counterpetitions and highlighting every instance where Ryan had forged my signature on shipping manifests over the last 2 years. I knew that to truly dismantle Ryan's narrative of my supposed confusion, I needed an independent witness. I called the manager of the steakhouse from the night before and asked for Evan. I found the young man sitting in a corner booth at a Dunkin' Donuts a few blocks away, looking nervous but determined. When I sat across from him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, I saw a spark of integrity in his eyes that I hadn't seen in my own son-in-law for years. Are you willing to tell the court what you saw tonight, Evan? I asked softly. He nodded without a second thought. I saw her put that powder in your wine, Mrs. Shaw, and I just couldn't let it happen, he said. It was a bitter realization that a stranger would risk his job to protect me while my own daughter had been holding the glass. Wright made the arrangements for Evan to be at the courthouse by 8 a.m., and as we walked out, I felt the first real warmth of support in a very long time. As the sun began to rise over the Charlotte skyline, I sat in Wright's office reviewing the smuggling evidence we had pulled from the files. Ryan had been using my biotechnology firm's logistics network to move restricted components under the radar for nearly 24 months. If I hadn't sold the company when I did, I would have eventually been dragged into a federal investigation as a silent accomplice. The cruelty of his plan was deeper than I had imagined. He didn't just want the money from the sale. He wanted me to be the scapegoat for his crimes while he lived comfortably on my inheritance. A jolt of energy ran down my spine, replacing any lingering exhaustion. The fear that had paralyzed me at the restaurant was gone, replaced by an ironclad will to survive. I was going to finish this monster before he could ever lay a hand on my life again. At 7:30 in the morning, I stood in the mirror of the law firm's executive washroom, adjusting the collar of my white silk shirt. I pulled on a dark blazer and smoothed the fabric over my shoulders. I applied a light but sharp layer of makeup, hiding the exhaustion of a night spent without sleep. The woman looking back at me was not a grieving widow or a confused senior citizen in need of a guardian. She was Laura Shaw, the CEO who had led thousands of people through the 2008 recession and lived to tell the story. I whispered Peter's name to the empty room, asking for the strength he always gave me, and I promised him I wouldn't let them destroy what we had built together. I walked out of that office with a firm step, ready to walk into that courtroom and take back the life they thought they could steal. After leaving the lawyer's office, I found myself sitting in a small, quiet diner on the corner that had just opened for the early morning rush. The rich scent of cinnamon from warm rolls and the deep aroma of freshly roasted coffee filled the cozy space, offering a sharp contrast to the sterile, freezing air of the hospital room or the suffocating tension of the uptown office just an hour ago. I sat on a red velvet booth, looking across the table at the two men who had become my anchors. One was my longtime associate, and the other was a young waiter I had only met the night before. Suddenly, I felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth begin to seep into my frozen heart. I looked at Evan, who was still wearing his restaurant jacket with his name embroidered on the chest, his eyes showing his exhaustion, but remaining incredibly steady. I asked him the question that had been weighing on me all night. Why did you take such a risk to warn me? He could have lost his job or faced retaliation from Ryan. The boy smiled, a pure and honest expression I hadn't seen on Emily's face in far too long. He told me about his grandmother back in South Carolina, who had been scammed out of her entire retirement savings by someone she trusted, all because she was too lonely. He helped me not for a reward, but because he couldn't stand the thought of another grandmother suffering that kind of pain. Evan's simple words made me realize that kindness still exists in the most unexpected places. Wright placed his large, weathered hand over mine, a rare gesture of comfort in our 30 years of professional partnership. He told me that since Peter passed away, he had always looked at me like an older sister. His dedication last night wasn't just a lawyer's duty to a client. It was the protection of a family member. I finally understood a very expensive lesson. Family isn't just about who shares your blood. It's about who chooses to stand by you when everyone else has turned their back. I had lost my faith in Emily, but life had compensated me with Evan and Wright. As the first rays of sunlight began to spill through the diner windows, I felt that I was no longer a lonely, grieving widow. I had a team. I had a purpose. And most importantly, I had rediscovered my faith in people. The regret of the last 15 years was still there, but it no longer felt like a weight crushing me down. Instead, it was a motivation to build something new and more lasting. I took a deep breath, feeling the life surging back into my chest. "Thank you both," I said, my voice trembling with emotion but filled with resolve. "Now, let us go and finish this." Have you ever received help from a total stranger just when you felt the most hopeless? Sometimes the family we choose brings us a more miraculous strength than our own flesh and blood. Please share your story with Casey and let me know if you also believe that kindness is always present around us. As Wright's car pulled to a stop in front of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, I took a long, steady breath to find my center. The morning sun in Charlotte was reflecting off the grand white stone columns of the building, making it look like a sanctuary of truth and order. But the air around me felt thick with a sudden, sharp sense of danger. I had walked into this morning believing that the hard drive in my bag was my ultimate shield, a digital record of the truth that would finally end this nightmare. But as I stepped onto the pavement, I saw two uniformed police officers standing near the side entrance, deep in conversation with Ryan and a man in a white lab coat. My heart skipped a jagged beat when Ryan turned and pointed a trembling finger toward me. His face twisted into a mask of theatrical horror. I did not even have time to process the sight before one of the officers began walking toward me, his hand resting near his belt as he ordered me to stay exactly where I was. Wright immediately stepped into the gap between us, using his commanding lawyer's presence to intercept the officer. But from several yards away, I could hear the voice of the man in the lab coat. That was Dr. Reed, Ryan's associate, and he was loudly explaining to the police that I had suffered a total mental breakdown following the death of my husband, Peter. He was claiming that I was in the grip of a severe psychotic episode and that in my delusional state, I had tried to poison my own daughter, Emily, because I was jealous of her youth and her happiness. Ryan stood beside him, burying his face in his hands as if he were sobbing, crying out that I had lost my mind and had hidden drugs in the wine to hurt his wife. A wave of pure, physical disgust washed over me as I realized they were not just after the money anymore. They were trying to steal my very sanity and my dignity as a mother. Reed stepped forward and held out a thick manila folder, which he called my secret medical file, a collection of forged documents detailing years of psychological treatment I had never actually received. He was telling the officers that I was a direct danger to myself and to everyone around me, and that I needed to be taken into immediate involuntary custody for a psychiatric evaluation. It was a chillingly perfect plan to remove me from the board. If the officers believed him, I would be dragged away to a locked ward, and the 8 o'clock hearing would proceed without me there to defend myself, giving Ryan the legal guardianship he craved. I looked at Wright and saw the tension tightening the corners of his eyes. We had exactly 10 minutes before the judge was set to open the doors, and the weight of those forged lies was starting to pull the ground out from under us. As Wright launched into a fierce legal argument with the officers about the validity of Reed's credentials and the lack of a court order for my detention, I found myself staring at Ryan. He refused to meet my eyes, looking everywhere but at me. And then I noticed a small detail that changed everything. He was clutching Emily's phone in his right hand. A cold clarity suddenly hit me, making me shiver despite the Charlotte humidity. He needed that phone because it held the digital records of his messages with Reed, the instructions on how to use the olanzapine to drug me. The realization was a physical blow to my stomach. Ryan had been perfectly willing to let Emily die just to create a crime scene where I was the only suspect. My daughter was not just his accomplice. She had been a disposable pawn in his game from the very beginning. I remembered the hard drive tucked safely inside my Talbot's bag and the backup files I had managed to scrape from their home computer. Among the business records was a saved file of dashcam footage from Emily's SUV, something I had copied in those frantic moments before leaving their house. I knew there was a short clip recorded just before they arrived at the restaurant. A moment where the camera caught Ryan handing a small vial of white powder to Emily. I remember his voice on the recording, muffled but clear, telling her to just get it done so they could have everything they ever wanted. I took a step toward the lead officer, my voice sounding incredibly calm and resonant in the open air. "Officer," I said, "if you truly want to know who poisoned my daughter, You should look at this footage instead of listening to a doctor who is currently drowning in gambling debts." The sheer conviction in my tone made the officer pause, his hand moving away from his holster. Wright seized the moment, insisting that the officers accompany us into the hearing room so that the evidence could be presented directly to the judge as part of the public record. I watched the blood drain from Ryan's face, leaving him looking sickly and small under the bright morning sun. He and Reed tried to turn and walk away toward their car, but Wright was already there, blocking their path with the predatory grace of a man who had won 1,000 battles. "It is time," Wright said, his eyes as sharp as a blade as he looked Ryan up and down. We walked toward the courthouse doors, leaving the chaos of their lives behind us on the sidewalk. I knew the danger of being detained was still real, but for the first time, I felt like I was the one holding the scales of justice for my own life. The heavy courtroom doors creaked shut behind me, instantly muffling the harsh noise and the venomous accusations Ryan had been hurling in the hallway. Inside, the air was still and held the deep, comforting scent of old oak and the gravity of the law. I sat down on a long wooden bench, my fingers interlaced tightly in my lap to steady the faint tremor in my hands. While Wright was busy organizing his files on the mahogany table, I found myself drifting away from the sterile light of the present and into a distant memory, back to a time when this kind of pain didn't even have a name. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was standing under the brilliant red maple trees of Freedom Park on a crisp October afternoon in Charlotte. Peter was there, wearing his old Carolina Panthers cap and that gentle smile that always made me feel like the most important woman in the world. He was holding the back of Emily's tiny bicycle, running along beside her. I can still hear her high, sweet laughter as she shouted, "Look at me, Dad," the moment she finally pedaled on her own. Back then, we were just a small family with simple dreams, before the millions of dollars and the cold ambition of men like Ryan poisoned our lives. That memory felt so warm and real that I almost reached out to touch the soft wool of Peter's sweater. Peter used to say that money is just a cold, empty number if you don't have enough love to keep it warm. He spent his life trying to teach Emily about compassion and the value of things you can't put in a bank account. Looking back at the last 15 years, I realized I was so focused on building a financial fortress for her that I forgot to guard her soul from the darkness. But in this quiet moment of reflection, I didn't feel any anger toward my daughter. I only felt a deep, aching sorrow. She has lost herself, trading the values her father cherished for a hollow promise of wealth. Her betrayal today isn't just an attack on me. It is a desperate, misguided cry for help from a soul that has completely lost its way. I opened my eyes and looked down at my wedding ring, feeling a sudden, calm peace spread through my chest. I understood then that I wasn't in this room to destroy my daughter, but to save what was left of our family name. I had to be strong enough to end Ryan's manipulation so that Emily might have a chance, however painful, to wake up and find her way back to the person she was meant to be. "Peter, I can feel you here with me," I whispered to the empty air. "You are my strength and the compass that will keep me steady in these final hours." I took a long breath, feeling a new sense of confidence fill my lungs. The pain was still there, but it no longer made me feel fragile. I looked at Wright, and he gave me a sharp, steady nod to let me know he was ready. When the judge finally entered the room and everyone rose, I didn't feel like a victim or a lonely widow anymore. I was a mother performing her final, most difficult duty, protecting the truth and the honor of those I love. The time for regret is over, and now it is time for the truth to speak. The heavy, dry crack of Judge Henderson's gavel echoed through the room like a snapping bone, cutting through my thoughts of Peter and the maple trees of Freedom Park. I took a deep, shaky breath, feeling the metallic taste of pure tension coating my tongue as the weight of the moment settled over my shoulders. Across the polished mahogany of the courtroom, Ryan sat beside his high-priced attorney, his fingers nervously picking at the corner of the guardianship petition. He was trying so hard to project the image of a man devastated by grief for his wife, but whenever his eyes flickered toward me, I saw only the cold, jagged calculation of a man waiting to occupy a life that was not his to take. It was a look I had seen in corporate boardrooms for 40 years, the look of someone waiting for a hostile takeover. Ryan's lawyer stood up first, his voice dripping with a rehearsed, sickening pity that made my skin crawl. He began to weave a tale about a 68-year-old woman crumbling under the crushing weight of grief and early-onset dementia since the passing of her husband. Your Honor, Mrs. Shaw is no longer capable of managing her own affairs or even ensuring her own basic safety, he claimed, casting a sorrowful look in my direction. He went on to describe my supposed erratic behavior, claiming I had become a danger to myself and had lashed out at my only daughter in a fit of confusion. Beside him, Ryan bowed his head, his shoulders shaking as if he were sobbing into his hands, playing his part in this final act to the very end. I sat there and watched him with a terrifying kind of stillness, knowing that in this country, justice isn't built on crocodile tears or hollow performances, but on the cold, hard reality of evidence. When Mr. Wright finally stood up, I felt my heart hammer a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. He didn't waste time with flowery speeches or emotional appeals. Instead, he requested that the court view the digital files we had recovered from the dashcam of Emily's SUV, the very car I had been making the monthly payments on for years. As the large screen in the courtroom flickered to life, the atmosphere turned stagnant. The footage was undeniable. There was Ryan, his face clear as day, handing a small vial of white powder to my daughter in the front seat of the car. His voice, caught by the high-quality microphone, filled the silent room like a death sentence. "Just get it done, Emily," he had said. "Once she drifts off for a few hours, Reed will handle the rest. We will have the $60 million, and that federal audit will be nothing but a memory." The entire courtroom went so silent, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I watched Ryan go from pale to a sickly, bruised purple as the air left his lungs. "I want to be heard," I said, standing up before anyone could stop me. My voice didn't tremble the way Ryan had hoped it would. It carried the resonance of a woman who had survived every economic storm from the 2008 recession to the current shifts of 2025. I looked directly into his eyes, the same eyes that had once convinced me he was a good man for my daughter. "Ryan, you have spent weeks telling everyone I was losing my mind, but the truth is, I was finally clear enough to see exactly what you are. You never saw me as a mother or even a human being. You saw me as a set of digits in a bank account, a winning lottery ticket you were tired of waiting for. You sat at my table and laughed with me while you had a poison in your pocket designed to erase my soul. You didn't just want my money. You wanted to turn me into a ghost in my own home so you could hide your dirty smuggling crimes behind my reputation." I turned toward the judge, but my words were really meant for Emily, even though she was still lying in a hospital bed miles away. I spent 40 years building Shaw Biotech with sweat and integrity, and I did not do it so it could become a shield for smugglers and thieves. I have lived with the regret of being too busy to see the rot growing in my own family. But today, that betrayal ends. Ryan, you can call me confused, and you can lie about my health, but you can never afford to buy the truth. You underestimated the intelligence of a woman who has spent her life navigating crises, and that was the greatest mistake you ever made. The pain of being betrayed by my own blood will likely follow me to my grave. But I will not let you define me as weak for even one more second. Suddenly, Ryan snapped. He lost all pretense of the grieving husband, slamming his fists onto the mahogany table and screaming profanities at me, accusing me of forging the footage and conspiring with Wright to destroy him. He lunged toward me like a wounded, desperate animal until the court security officer swarmed him, pinning his arms behind his back. In that moment of absolute chaos, I didn't feel a single ounce of fear. I felt an incredible, soaring sense of liberation. The feeling of being cornered and suffocated had vanished, replaced by the unbreakable resolve of a woman who had finally reclaimed her own life. I watched as they led Ryan away in handcuffs, and I knew that while my heart might be scarred, my spirit was finally free. How do you feel witnessing the moment Laura Shaw stood up and unmasked the person who tried to manipulate her entire existence? Is this kind of strength enough to truly heal the deep scars in a mother's heart? Please leave a comment and tell me if you support Laura's direct confrontation or if you think she should have chosen a quieter path. Do not forget to share this story if you also believe in the undeniable power of the truth. The sound of the Charlotte police sirens slowly faded into the distance as they hauled Ryan away in handcuffs. I stood there on the cold stone steps of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, feeling the sharp bite of the autumn wind as it pulled at my gray hair. Everything had happened so incredibly fast that I felt a bit dizzy, as if the ground beneath my Talbot's loafers was still shifting. Wright stood beside me, his heavy leather briefcase filled with the evidence that had just dismantled my son-in-law's life, but also mine in a way. He reached out and touched my shoulder, whispering that we had finally done it, that it was over. I just gave him a slow nod, but there was no rush of victory in my chest. There was only a vast, echoing emptiness, a silence that felt exactly like my quiet living room on those long nights when sleep refused to come. We went back to Wright's office in Uptown to finalize the paperwork that would officially put an end to this nightmare. The FBI had already stepped in, taking over the files from the Shaw contingency and launching a full federal investigation into the smuggling operation. As I sat in the high-backed leather chair, I watched the news headlines starting to pop up on my phone, seeing my family name splashed across the screen next to words like fraud and conspiracy. It felt like a physical blow to my stomach. I felt a deep, aching sadness for Peter. We had spent our entire adult lives building the Shaw name into a symbol of integrity in the biotech industry. And in just a few months, Ryan's greed had nearly turned that legacy into a pile of ash. Wright laid out my most recent bank statement on the mahogany desk between us. $60 million. The number sat there, clean and undeniable, finally back under my absolute control with no predators left to pick at it. But as I stared at those zeros, all I could think about was that dinner at the steakhouse. I had walked into that restaurant intending to use this money to buy back my daughter's love, thinking a big enough check could somehow make up for the 15 years of life I had missed while I was busy being a CEO. It is a cruel irony, isn't it, that the very wealth I hoped would mend my family was the exact thing that tore it apart so violently. I realized then that while money can build a corporate empire or pay for the best lawyers in North Carolina, it is completely useless when it comes to fixing a heart that has been dried up by greed. "Laura, what do you want to do about Emily?" Wright asked me, his voice breaking the heavy silence of the office. That was the question that had been gnawing at me since the sun came up. Legally, she was an accomplice, and she could very easily end up in a prison cell right next to Ryan. But every time I closed my eyes, I didn't see the woman who had held a vial of powder in a restaurant. I saw the 5-year-old girl with the big, trusting eyes who used to hold my hand so tightly. I couldn't bear the thought of my only child rotting away in a cell. But I also knew I could no longer enable the weakness and the selfishness that allowed her to pick up that poison in the first place. I needed a different kind of justice. I needed a way to help her find her soul again, even if I had to tear her world down to do it. I had Wright draft a new set of legal documents right then and there. I decided to officially disinherit her, removing any right she had to the $60 million or the family estate. She wouldn't receive a single penny of that fortune. Instead, I established a very small, restricted trust that would only cover her most basic needs on one condition. She had to leave that luxury house in the suburbs, cut off all contact with Ryan, and begin working 40 hours a week at a homeless shelter in the city center. She needs to learn the actual value of a dollar and, more importantly, the value of a human life that hasn't been bought and sold. That was my sentence for her, a chance to start over from nothing and hopefully find the person her father always believed she could be. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do, but it was the only way I could truly call myself a mother again. By the time the clock on the wall struck 2 in the afternoon, I knew it was time to go back to the hospital. I stood in front of the mirror in Wright's executive washroom, adjusting my silk scarf and doing my best to hide the exhaustion etched into the lines of my face. I wasn't carrying any more anger or fury with me. I was only carrying the truth and a very long, difficult road toward redemption for my daughter. I knew the conversation we were about to have would be the most painful one of my life, perhaps even more painful than the day I said goodbye to Peter. But as I walked out of that office and toward the waiting car, my steps were slow and steady. I was ready to close the door on the past and see if there was anything left for us to build in the future. I pushed open the heavy door to room 412 with a hand that felt strangely steady. Inside, the rhythmic, high-pitched beep of the heart monitor filled the space, sounding so mechanical and cold that it felt almost cruel. Emily was awake. She was sitting up slightly, her gaze fixed on the window where the glass reflected the first evening lights of the Charlotte skyline beginning to flicker to life. When she saw me, I caught a fleeting spark of genuine terror in her eyes before she quickly adjusted her expression, letting a thin veil of tears cloud her vision. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times, a manipulative mask I had once mistaken for a daughter's love. I pulled the heavy wooden guest chair closer to her bed and sat down, placing my bag firmly on my lap. I didn't bring flowers this time. I didn't bring a card or a gift. I only brought a thick manila folder titled "The Truth." "Mom, where is Ryan?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she reached for the script he must have practiced with her 12 times. "He told me you were so sick, that you were having another episode, and I was so worried about you." I looked at her, and for a moment, my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. This was the child I had sung to sleep every single night. This was the daughter I had built an entire world for, hoping she would one day lead the Shaw legacy with pride. Ryan is currently in federal custody being processed by the FBI. "Emily," I said, my voice sounding incredibly calm, even to my own ears. "And he has already started talking. He told them everything. He told them about the olanzapine, about the smuggling routes he carved through my company, and he even admitted that he was perfectly willing to let you die if the plan to frame me for your poisoning went wrong. I saw her fingers tighten around the white hospital sheet until her knuckles turned a ghostly white. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and hollowed out by a sudden, jagged despair. I reached into the folder and handed her the printed transcripts and a tablet already loaded with the dashcam footage from her own SUV. I have seen it all, Emily. I heard you agree to his plan in that car. I heard you choose $60 million over the only mother you have left in this world. Emily began to cry then, but this time, the sound was different. It was a loud, ugly sobbing that came from deep in her chest, a sound of someone who realized they were finally out of lies. She started rambling about Ryan's debts, about how he had threatened her and manipulated her until she felt like she had no other choice. I sat there in the silence and listened. I didn't interrupt her. I let the words fall between us until she finally reached out, her hand shaking as she tried to grasp mine to beg for forgiveness. I didn't pull away harshly, but I slowly retreated just enough to make her understand. Forgiveness does not come from a desperate plea in a hospital room, Emily. It comes from a long, painful change of heart. I pulled out the legal contract Mr. Wright had drafted just hours ago. I am not going to press charges against you. You won't be going to prison with Ryan. But as of tomorrow morning, you are no longer the heir to the Shaw fortune. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a blank, stunned confusion. You are disinheriting me, she asked, the words barely a breath. Yes, I said, my voice firm and immovable. The house in the suburbs, the luxury SUV, the limitless credit cards, it is all being revoked immediately. I was wrong to think that money could ever make up for the time I lost with you. And I realize now that the very wealth I gave you is what rotted your soul from the inside out. Starting next week, you will move into a one-bedroom apartment near the Hope Center. I have already arranged a job for you there. You will spend 40 hours a week cleaning floors, cooking meals, and looking after people who have absolutely nothing. You will live on the minimum wage you earn with your own two hands. You need to learn how to feel the pain of others if you ever want to value your own life again. Emily stared at the contract, then looked back at me. For the first time in 15 years, the arrogance and the distant, cold look in her eyes had vanished. She slumped back into her pillows, her shoulders shaking with a heavy, wordless grief. I am sorry, Mom, she choked out. I have lost everything, haven't I? No. Emily, I said. And this time I reached out and gently stroked her hair, letting my hand linger there without pulling back. You are only just beginning to find yourself. I am using that $60 million to start a foundation to protect seniors from financial and emotional abuse. I am keeping just enough to make sure you won't starve. But from now on, you will walk on your own feet. It is the only way you will ever be able to stand at your father's grave and look at his name without feeling ashamed. We sat there in the quiet for a long time, as the darkness finally swallowed the room, leaving only the soft glow of the monitor and the city lights outside. The pain was still there, a dull and constant ache in my chest, but the suffocating weight of the lies had finally lifted. I felt as though I had just completed the most important takeover of my entire career. I had reclaimed my daughter's soul from the darkness that had consumed her. The years we lost are gone forever, but perhaps we can build something new from the wreckage of this night. As I stood up to leave, Emily whispered my name. Mom, she said, will you come see me tomorrow? I paused at the door and looked back. offering her a small, sad smile. I will be here, but I won't be bringing a checkbook. I will be bringing a home-cooked meal I made myself. Get some rest, sweetheart. I walked out of that hospital and looked up at the vast North Carolina sky. And for the first time in so many years, I felt like I was finally free. 6 months later, autumn in North Carolina has never felt quite this gentle. I sit on my porch, watching the maple leaves turn a brilliant, fiery red, feeling the soft morning chill brush against my cheeks. My house is no longer filled with that suffocating, heavy silence that used to haunt every room. Instead, I hear the sound of laughter and voices drifting out from the kitchen, and the rich, comforting scent of fresh coffee and baking muffins signals the start of a day full of purpose. Everything has changed, not through an act of cold revenge, but through the simple, quiet courage it took to start over from nothing. Evan is sitting at the patio table, now working as an intern for my new foundation. He is excitedly telling me about his college plans for next year, his eyes bright with a future that he earned through his own integrity. Wright just stopped by as well, carrying a bag of crisp apples he picked up from the local farmer's market. We spend our mornings talking about our new projects to protect the elderly and the values that Peter always hoped we would uphold. I look at them and I cannot help but smile. This is my chosen family, the people who stand by me because of who I am, not because of the $60 million in my bank account. And as for Emily, I received a letter from her this morning. She wrote about the first time someone at the shelter truly thanked her for a meal she had cooked with her own hands. Her palms are calloused from hard work now, but the tone of her letter has finally begun to hold a trace of warmth again. It is a long journey ahead for her, but at least we are finally walking in the right direction. The story of Laura Shaw ends here, carrying with it a long, quiet sigh of relief. As the storyteller, I am deeply moved by the incredible strength of this woman. Laura has taught us that while money can build a massive corporate empire, only the truth and firm boundaries can ever truly save a family. Betrayal from your own children might be the deepest wound a heart can carry, but it does not have to define your value as a person. You are never too old to reclaim the driver's seat of your own life, to say no to manipulation, and to finally say yes to your own peace of mind. Through this journey, I hope every listener, especially those of you in the golden years of your lives, remembers one thing. Do not wait until you are backed into a corner to wake up. Cherish your time, but never use it to buy a hollow, fake connection. The true legacy you leave for your children is not the number of zeros in an inheritance, but the lesson of self-respect and the inherent value of honest labor. Healing does not mean forgetting the pain. It means using that pain to build a version of yourself that is stronger than you ever thought possible. My dear friends, has Laura Shaw's journey reminded you of a memory or a lesson within your own family? Which part of her message felt the most valuable to you after listening to her story? Please share your thoughts and the lessons you have learned in the comments below. Casey is always here to listen and to help you heal. I look forward to seeing you all in our next story.